This is the Equity Charter podcast, where we talk about why we care about equity in the digital health sector and why we think you should too. Welcome to this week's episode of the Equity Charter podcast. My name is Aisha Rahim and I'm a psychiatrist and Chief Clinical Information Officer working in the NHS. Along with my colleagues Hassan Chowdhury and Victoria Betton, we developed 10 principles for embedding equity within the digital health sector. For this week's episode, we'll be looking at Principle 2, which is leaders, teams and organisations champion equity. And here to discuss this topic with us today, we have our two experts, Monique Carayol and Andy Callow. Welcome to the show, Andy and Monique. Thank you for joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you, Aisha. Really good to join you again.
Great stuff. So I'm going to start off by asking you both about yourselves and about your current role. So Andy, shall I start with you? Tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Andy Callow. I'm the Chief Digital and Transformation Officer at Nottingham University Hospitals. It's also my great privilege to be the executive sponsor for the REACH network. That's the Race, Equality and Cultural Heritage Network, staff network at the hospital. Been at the hospital for about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was at Kettering and Northampton hospitals, and then I spent some time in the national NHS digital team as it was then. And the time I left, I was the programme director for the NHS app.
Great. And same question to you, Monique.
Yeah, thank you. So I run a consultancy that focuses on leadership and talent development, and I like to describe our work as building a movement of brave leaders. So we really work with organisations to build brave, inclusive leadership capability and confidence. And that consultancy is called Your New Avenue. I'm also the co-founder of the Bravery in the Boardroom movement, which I know you're both familiar with, but we are focused on seeing boardrooms more representative of the communities and staff they serve. And I really believe in large-scale movements to drive change at scale, particularly around inclusion. And a little bit about my background. Prior to doing this work, I had a 20-year career in the NHS. I started off in an admin role. I was a commissioner for 10 years. And the last 5 years of my time, I was a director of strategy and transformation at a community health provider in London.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And so if we start with a general question, when I think about strong leadership in the field of equity, I wonder what does that look like from your perspective? If we can come to yourself, maybe Monique first.
Yeah, I think what I see a lot of, and I think it's not bad, is the focus on equality. So almost that focus on at the front door, if we use that language. So where we're trying to think about people who we need to access services or people we want to support, and then that issue of, things like digital exclusion. What I'd like to see more of, and why I love the work you're doing, is to support colleagues and the whole ecosystem about thinking more about equity. So coming back a few steps and taking that opportunity to think about where are the options to really think about equitable and inclusive design thinking at the outset. We rarely start from a blank piece of paper, I know, but it's just understanding that subtle but important difference between equality and equity. I think that's really important.
Thank you. And Andy, if I come to you next, I'm really intrigued also about, from your perspective and the positions that you sit in, how much would you say equity is on people's minds in the digital health world? And, what's your impression of the distance that we have to travel in this field?
Yeah, it sort of feels like it's piecemeal, really. So, where action will be taken at a data level will be a new directive around recording some additional information. So recently there's been some information around additional assistance being required as a field that needs to be logged on systems. And so I think we're well set up to respond to those things, and the system suppliers do their part and people do their, take the actions along there. I think that is still largely a reactive thing. I don't see examples of us really sort of thinking about, well, how do we use the information that we've got? How do we make sure that our systems are as equitable as they can be? I still see examples within our trust where it's really quite hard to provide information in any other language other than English. We do try, but it's a kind of exception rather than something that's very easily accessible routinely.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering about fear of getting it wrong as barriers to action in this space, because as you say, I think we have some assets and frameworks and processes that we can draw on, and yet it feels like there's still a bit of a gap between the policy and the practice. And so I'm just wondering again from both of you, what you've seen, what you've observed in terms of some of those barriers to action.
The fear of getting it wrong is very common. And in all the work I do, working with leaders across all different sectors, I hear that so much. I think there's something about you don't have to understand it all to be able to offer support, to have curiosity as a leader, to want to understand how you can support or help someone better, or how we can make sure the service or product that we're offering will meet the needs of all who we're trying to serve. You don't have to understand it all. And what I hear and see a lot is people, I want to use the right language, I want to use the right terminology. And of course, colleagues don't want to offend and you don't want to discriminate. But getting stuck behind that, if I can know the right language and terminology, then that's what's going to help me to make a change. It usually isn't the case. It's the confidence to be open, to be curious, and to, may I ask? So that question, what do you think? What can I do to help you to access this service better? Is there anything more we can be doing differently? Those open questions are really the things that are the game changers and sound very simple, but they're ones that we can all use and implement, because an open question, you can't get it wrong. You're asking for that insight. And of course, the follow through is that you either act on that or you provide that honest response that isn't something that we are going to be able to do, but what we can do is. So I'd really encourage people to maybe really reflect on, where's that fear really coming from? And if you do get something wrong, because we all make mistakes, can we have the grace to apologise, to understand and acknowledge the impact of that, and then to still try and move forward? That's really the bravery in action.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, it sounds like what we're describing partly is a leadership trait of humility.
Yes.
And not expecting ourselves to have all the answers, to know everything, to get it right first time, as much as we might want to do that. And is that something that resonates with either of you at all?
Yeah, although I think I've sort of over the last few years feel a bit more challenging in that space, in that when we're looking for leaders to join the organisation, that cultural competence or a really being able to respond to the needs and diversity and being inclusive are crucial traits, just as equal as technical traits. And so I have the privilege of sitting on consultant interview panels within the trust, and I make sure that there's a question around equality, diversity and inclusion in there, and really listen carefully for a sort of genuine response, because these people are joining our organisation, and they are the largest leadership body that we have within the organisation, and can be incredibly influential. So I think it's crucial that that competence is included, and without breaking confidences, there has been situations where that answer has been a deep concern in amongst a very good otherwise interview.
And that's a really interesting observation, isn't it, about a very tangible action that organisations can take to sort of find out and to gauge where people are at a really pivotal stage of recruitment.
I've had the privilege of interviewing Andy on our Bravery in the Boardroom podcast. And Andy, I think you spoke very candidly and have that bravery about, I may get things wrong. It's not intentional, but I'm open to learning. I'm open to listening, and then I'm open to acting. And I think, I'd encourage people to take a listen to that episode, actually, because it really brings it to life about discomfort and fear can be present, right? But as a leader, it doesn't mean that that's an excuse or a reason to not take action.
I realise that the reason I am able to have that boldness, maybe wouldn't put it as strongly as that, but being willing to give it a go comes from a position of privilege. So I know that can look back on situations where I got things wrong. There's a certain example I can talk about around where I put something on my blog that didn't hit the spot, and I got some feedback, really carefully crafted and helpful feedback that allowed me to make that change. Now, I didn't get attacked or around that, but it helped me sort of understand the situation a bit more and make the change. And so, but I recognise that is some of that comes with the privilege that I have.
Mm-hmm. And Monique, going back to your Bravery in the Boardroom movement, I'd love to know a little bit more about that. How did that all start? Tell us about what that movement is about.
Yeah, so my background being in change and transformation, what I learned from leading large-scale programs across organizations and systems was that you need layers of spaces where you bring people together to drive the change. It's why I'm so passionate about supporting the charter, because I know you need that. And what the vision was creating an ecosystem and space where we have the difficult conversations, where we can be more candid, where people can leave those conversations or rooms feeling inspired, but also feeling equipped to take action. But pulling it back down to the micro level, what I also wanted to do was create a space where we could spotlight and speak with senior leaders who were driving change in inclusion, who were doing different things around, developing diversity across the organization, but looking at both sides of the coin. So it wasn't just about, what we see a lot is those who are underrepresented are supported quite rightly, and development programs are common. Equity networks like what Andy chairs are common, and they're not wrong, but they're only one side of the coin. So if we're equipping people to be ready to lead in spaces that are not yet inclusive, what are we doing to work with leaders who are in the majority, who are responsible for creating inclusive cultures? How are we working with them as well? And Bravery in the Boardroom seeks to bring both of those pieces together. And so, as I said, share the stories and journeys, but more importantly, what are leaders doing now? Who are the ones who are turning the dial now? And also bringing forward change agents. So people working at all levels, across all different parts of equality and equity, bringing those conversations to light as well. So I've had the pleasure of interviewing many people, including yourselves in the Equity Charter, who are to just use the podcast space to widen reach, and anyone can access a podcast, right? Well, within reason, anyone can access the podcast. They're usually free to access. There will be some equity barriers, but podcasts break down quite a lot of the barriers that I think people can't get into the rooms or can't access the mentorship that they need. The idea is that those conversations in Bravery in the Boardroom open those conversations up and give that tap on the shoulder to anyone who needs it.
Yeah, and it's such a vital asset, and we will certainly put a link to the show in the show notes of this podcast as well. We'd encourage people to check that out. But I'm intrigued around the concept of micro leadership and those small scale, what I think of as leaderful actions, because I suppose it's tempting to think about leadership as being associated with a particular band in the NHS or a particular job title of a level of seniority. But I don't think that's necessarily what we mean about when we're talking around being leaderful and showing leadership. And I just wondered if either of you had perspectives on that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you that leadership happens at any level. It's not about the banding. And, some of the people I'm working alongside within the staff networks, for example, or all our staff networks, are being really creative and progressive in some of the things that they're suggesting and their ideas, and and rightfully a lot of the time being quite challenging about the stance of the organisation, and so some of those people are from a wide range of banding with the organisation. That forum gives them a voice that allows that voice to be elevated and given the right platform. So, for example, our staff networks meet with the chief executive at least on a quarterly basis, and some of those meetings there's no holds barred. They are extremely frank about how some of the actions of the organisation can make colleagues feel, and that's that's fantastic. As executive sponsors and as the chief executive, I know that those meetings are really helpful in terms of guiding the organisation's strategy forward.
And that feels really important, giving people of all sort of levels of the organisation that voice and that ability to be heard, I suppose, sounds like a really, really valuable space for people.
I think it's one of the most important things you can do, Aisha, as a senior leader. And I love to hear from Andy how, some of the points I'm making, how it's been brought to life, right, at his trust. But it's one of the most important things you can do. When I was an exec, I definitely didn't have all the ideas. And opening my door, whether that was the virtual door, when we were in COVID, or, physically going out of the door, but going to speak to frontline colleagues, trying wherever possible to level that space. So going to meet them where they were at, asking to be invited, not just barging in, but having those conversations and that same question, what do you think? And as Andy's saying there, listening even when the truth is hard. I'd encourage colleagues, if you feel like the role I hold, I haven't really got any autonomy, who am I? Some people feel like, isn't it? Is there an opportunity to connect with and tap into your networks and support groups, to be able to kind of bring your voice forward that way if you don't feel confident enough to sort of voice on your own? But for those of us who do have the privilege and power, please go out there and ask, create the space where people can bring their ideas forward, because the best ideas really are out there in your workforce. They understand things sometimes, what it feels like at that front end, a lot more than we do. They are the ones who are usually, serving, supporting, helping service users and their families. They will have much more insight than the person possibly holding the accountability for the change.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And as we've mentioned already on this podcast, Andy, you've been somebody that has championed equity in a really proactive way. And I'm just really kind of keen to hear from you about what has driven you, what continues to drive you to champion this.
So I was prompted by the death of George Floyd to read White Fragility, and that really was the thing that opened my eyes around what my privilege is and the responsibility I have as a result of that privilege to be the best ally I can be. I know some people don't like the word ally, but basically to try and understand further. So I am embarrassed, though, still to talk about that it took over 40 years of my life to sort of have that understanding of the difficulty that many colleagues go through their race. And then through that book, you also learned more about intersectionality and the impact that different protective characteristics have in terms of having a much difficult sort of passage through life just as a result of either the colour of their skin or their disability that is hidden and have to experience before they can even get to work in the morning. So that's the thing that sort of opened my eyes, and I sort of feel like there's much more I can do in this space, but I've tried to do some simple things that are within my control to do, and being part of the staff networks is one of those.
Yeah, and do tell us more about this, because I think often I hear a lot of people that are really keen to support, keen to do work in this space, but aren't really sure where to start. So I think it'd be great for people to hear about some of the tangible actions that you've taken in your career. So, I mean, one of the best things that you can do is to get part of a reciprocal mentoring program. I know they're often formally arranged within an organisation, but there's nothing stopping you actually sort of forming those relationships and seeking to offer that support. I've realised at my stage in my career that it's, I have benefited from people supporting me, mentoring me along the way. And so certainly at this point, as I'm getting older, is I need to pay that back and give other people opportunity to sort of share what experience or guidance I have. So the reciprocal mentoring is helpful in that. When I've been part of those programs in the past, I've learned a tremendous amount about it, and that was only exhibited sort of that learning recently, where we've had a conversation within our leadership team around visas and the
the experience that I understood from the colleague I was working with around having indefinite leave to remain was I had no appreciation of what that felt like within that context. So those things that sort of help the understanding, but also help contributions in future conversations. The other thing that I do, and again, I'm not trying to set this up as being something I do that's amazing, but it's quite simple for me to do. I make 2 hours a month in my diary available for anyone within the staff network to come and have a chat. And those conversations have ranged from interview preparation, creating for an application, or talking about how they might be more effective in their role, or for that matter, sharing some lived experience of where things haven't gone so well. On the back of those conversations, I created a series of, it's 5 now, blogs. I call them the How Not to Suck series. They started off as How Not to Suck at NHS Applications, and really that was based on the conversations with people I think we can acknowledge that the application process within the NHS is a sort of certain westernised cultural construct, and so therefore, if you're coming from a different cultural background, sometimes that isn't as clear. And so I sort of wanted to try and make that a bit easier, whilst it's still important to sort of try and address the cause of where those things aren't right. So there's a series of things in there, and one of the more recent ones was around negotiation, because I had a conversation as part of with some a women's group where basically I confessed that I negotiated my salary at every start of job that I've ever had in my career, and pretty much all the women around the table said no, I just accepted what was there. So I thought that was one that prompted my sharing some experiences around negotiation.
That's fantastic. And it's so interesting to me how a lot of these opportunities are threaded through seemingly unrelated aspects to the work that we all do, but actually there is a load of practical stuff that anybody can avail themselves of. So we'll certainly put a link to your blog series in our show notes as well. And so, Monique, coming back to you, if that's all right, I'm just wondering if you've got examples of attitudes having shifted through this sort of perseverance with this agenda, because I guess it can be hard to maintain resilience and your enthusiasm for this work, because it often feels quite difficult. But do you have any positive examples of things being able to change through somebody's actions?
Definitely. And it's why it's such a great question, and it's a very true question. This is hard work. And I always say, that feeling of being a change agent, and it feels like you're pushing that big boulder up the hill, right? And sometimes it feels like it's rolling back down and it's going to flatten you. And that's when resilience most probably feels quite low. And then other times and it's why I talk about the power of social movements, because when you are connecting and, liaising and working with and collaborating with others who are just as passionate about what you're trying to change, you feel like there are hands holding the boulder up with you. And that's where I'm a very determined character. I think my characteristic is I can be a bit over determined at times, gets me into trouble, but actually it's propelled me to go, well, yeah, I can do something here. And the support has been overwhelming. So what I would say is being brave enough to put my head above the parapet and say, there's something we could do here. Having that conversation early with my co-founders, Sam and Liam, and then really pushing and also getting our elbows out. So what I would say is I've definitely pushed my elbows out and gone, we don't want to be commissioned by the centre because we don't want to be censored. We want to have the candid conversation. We want to bring things forward in a way that we know that works and a way that we know isn't quite out there right now. So we had to be brave and say, actually, we're going to, fund this ourselves to get it off the ground. We are going to push in the way that we can see. I think working in the NHS for 20 years, I've got a massive bag of resilience, in the sense of having to navigate complex systems, hearing no, facing microaggressions, knowing that I was very different to everybody else in the boardroom. All of that, I think, has stood me in good stead to push the conversation and keep turning the dial quite hard right now. But my support toolbox is really important. So I know who I am, is what I would say. And my family are a massive, massive tool in my toolbox in terms of my rock. You know, I'm just Mon outside of, you know, work life. To my family, I always have been. It doesn't matter what I do. And that's really an important thing for me, because when you do feel under attack, or, you know, those challenges are coming thick and fast, the dissenters sound quite loud, I think it's important to have that fallback space where I can regroup and refresh myself.
Yeah, that's so valuable, isn't it? It's having that sort of grounding group that you can sort of draw
absolutely.
on. It's not easy work all the time. And I think my suspicion is that both of you may well have had quite different experiences in terms of doing this work, given your different demographic background. So Monique, obviously, is a black woman. I imagine your experience is quite different to Andy's as a white man. And perhaps this is a little bit on the nose, but I'm just wondering if you've noticed particular reactions in the process of you challenging others that you suspect have been different because of your background?
Oh, 100%. And I've had that all the way through my leadership career. So if we think about, my name doesn't convey that I'm black. So quite often I would have been liaising with senior colleagues quite a lot via email. They wouldn't have seen me. And then when they would, you know, we'd have an in-person meeting, or, you know, they'd realize, oh, you're Monique. And you could see what was not said was, I didn't expect you to be black, right?
Wow.
I could see it. And I'd get that a lot. My thing always has been is I don't flinch. So it's almost, I can see it. I've had a lot of people comment on my age because I looked a lot younger than what I was. So that comment of, are you really the director?
Wow.
You know, or you look really young to be a director. Those kind of comments where I'm not going to also say, and I didn't expect you to be black, but I can see it coming through. And my reaction would always be, I'm older than what I look. You know, shall we get on with the conversation? Or I'm here, shall we start? Shall I kick the meeting off now? Or I'm going to flick the slide deck on now. Let's start. Let's get on with this. Because I also knew what I was talking about. I was more than competent in delivering what I was. And that's not arrogance. I just knew I was good at what I did. And so actually, let my work do the talking, and you can kind of just process whatever's going off in your mind, because I'm here to do the work. And I talk about that quite a lot when the work we do with around the state of readiness, being ready to lead at a senior level when you are underrepresented or the environment isn't inclusive. And those people sometimes don't know how to catch their biases going off in the moment, right? So sometimes people say things before I've just said it. And if you know, may I ask what you mean by that? It catches people because they're like, what did I mean by that? Can I voice what I really meant by that? Or, you know, so I think that moment of being able to ask that curious question, if you want to, may I ask what you meant by that? Really will see how someone reacts. Some people will just say, do you know what? My goodness, actually, let me check myself. Let me reflect on it. Others will defend. Others, you may just see a body language reaction to it. But I think my experience being a commissioner when I became more senior in my career, as I said, really helped me when I've stepped into this space now. Being used to it isn't okay, but it's the truth. Being used to it, knowing how to handle it, and also most importantly, being able to guide others on when it does happen, how might you react and respond to that?
So important. Thank you for sharing that, Monique. And I guess, Andy, for yourself, you know, looking at the work that you do through the lens of being a white man, I'm just wondering if you had any reflections on how that influences what you do and the actions that you've taken.
Yeah, in as much as the reading a White Fragility and realising that, you know, when it came to the diversity scorecard, you know, I've come up trumps, but only accident of birth, you know, and so with that comes this recognition of the privilege and what I need to do as a result of that. So, and I think, you know, I've been able to feel comfortable about this term white fragility, and you know, I know that it's a deliberately provocative term, and I've lost track actually of how many of that copies of that book that I've given out, and as a Christian, I'm ashamed to say that I've given out more copies of Right Fragility than I have of the Bible. But anyway, that's another for the fact of it. So certainly, when I've had in our Black History Month celebrations in a previous year, I arranged to sort of have some book club sessions around white fragilities and invited people to read the book, and then we have a discussion. And I did get quite a vitriolic email from somebody who had sent it out that basically says, who really took umbrage at the phrase white fragility. And I really attempted to sort of have that dialogue with them in order to sort of explain my journey of where I'd come from around firstly bristling at that term and then realising what it meant and then taking action. And so I have to say I didn't really get very far in sort of persuading them that was there was a different way to look at this. And actually the important thing if you feel challenged by that sort of word, the thing to do, as Monique says, is sort of look back and say, well, why am I feeling like that? Why am I reacting to that set of words? And then use that to sort of help you, seek to understand or do something about it. And the first step is just being able to acknowledge that you do feel discomfort, but then not to bury that discomfort, but to then say, well, I'm going to lean into that and try and learn a bit more about, well, why do I feel discomfort, and how might I educate myself a bit more? I think the education bit is important, and I again, the thing I realised in White Fragility, it's not for colleagues from the global majority to teach me about what it's like to experience racism. I have to seek to understand that myself and then respond to how I support them.
It's some really interesting reflections from both of you, and I'm just sort of struck particularly by some of your last points, Andy, around sitting with discomfort and being curious about yourself. Because that feels to me like a leadership trait that is generally helpful in whatever domain you're talking about, whether it's equity or some other aspect of leadership, that ability or the willingness to be curious about yourself and your own reactions. And maybe that's my own bias as a psychiatrist coming through here as well, but it seems like a really helpful trait to cultivate in yourself.
I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is a sort of reflective practice, and I do mine quite publicly by doing a week note. But it feels to me that it's a practice that I can see our nursing colleagues it's sort of right from the development of their career, right from the off. But for people like me who've come up through the tech route, this idea of sort of reflecting is like completely unheard of, and it took a sort of accidental discovery for me. But that reflective practice of looking back on a situation and thinking, what did I react in the best way there? Was I the best version of myself, or was there something behind why I acted in that way, or when I said that, why did that person react in that way? Could I have done it better? And so, if we're talking about this being about within the digital health space, is it's a simple thing to those who have come up in the same route as I have, is that reflective practice. It's just a really important bit, and you probably can treat it like in software development. There's a whole thing around doing retrospectives about how did a project go. Really, what you're doing is a retrospective on your own leadership capabilities.
Yeah, such an interesting way of looking at things, and that sort of also tempering that with a bit of grace, I suppose, for want of a better word, understanding that we're all on a journey of some description, aren't we, in terms of trying to be the best versions of ourselves, and sort of using those insights about ourselves constructively to try and improve and iterate. Take another sort of analogy from the software development world about iterating and prototyping and continuously improving ourselves. We've talked a lot about leadership in the context of a sort of a top-down approach, but I'm just keen to get your reflections on sort of leading upwards and recognising that the context in which most of us work, we sit somewhere within an organisational structure where we're not necessarily just providing leadership for the teams that work with us, but also as part of peers, groups of peers, and also people more senior to us. And I'm just wondering, what nuance is that, and how does promoting equity leading upwards. How does that work? Any nuances that are helpful to draw out from that perspective?
I think leading by example is something we took, it's a term we hear bandied around a lot, right? Lead by example, walk the talk. But actually, if you are well tuned in, and as Andy, I was nodding furiously when Andy was speaking just now, right? But if you are someone who, you are a confident and reflective leader, you have the confidence in yourself, you have the capability to reflect on your own practice. Leading by example, sharing what you're doing and how you're doing it, because that's what I notice a lot of colleagues in terms of peer learning. Well, how did you deal with this then? Or how have you framed that then? Sounds really simple, but it can really help people. And I think sometimes, remember, just because people are more senior to us, it doesn't mean that they are more effective leaders quite often. And so actually, sometimes your leading by example is that managing upwards. That being able to maybe ask those questions to senior leaders. What are you most concerned about? I use a term of what are your feet being held to the fire on, but quite often senior leaders will sometimes give you half the story of why something's a priority or why it's been done in a certain way. And if you can get some insight into that, it can sometimes help you to see, okay, if that's what's on their mind, how might we come about what it is we're trying to seek change on or to raise things on? Or, as Andy was saying, you cut to the chase. And actually that example, what he gave there of the meetings that, he and his CEO have with network members where the conversation is frank, there is permission, the room is, there is permission to be honest and open, using those as well. So, but let's not underestimate how much leading by example can be a game changer when you're trying to affect change and to help people to understand and acknowledge why equity is important.
One approach that's potentially useful is to sort of go back around, the idea of diversity in the workplace is not just an element of charity or a moral response. There's actually a really sound business imperative to it.
Yes.
And I suppose, if colleagues are struggling to perhaps make some of the arguments based on it's the right thing to do, it aligns with our, with my values, then you can always go back to the business element. And the other book that I read in 2020 was Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. And he talked about how diversity of thinking, is a really sound business move. And actually, if we all come with the same background, the same experience, the same cultural experience, then actually our decision making will sort of go into a sort of narrow band, and that's where we'll fail to make the best decisions. We won't necessarily respond and deliver services that are reflective of the wider communities that we serve. And so, that seems to be another approach that people can use. And lots of organisations have this concept of a shadow board where they draw upon people within the organisation from a diverse backgrounds in order to help inform that.
Yeah. Well, that's been a really fascinating conversation with loads of tangible examples about how people can act and change. So just coming to the very last question for both of you. What could people do tomorrow to promote equity as a leader? Do you have any top tips, Monique, if I come to you?
Yeah, I think that understanding where at least one of your equity barriers are, that might sound large, but it isn't. So actually, Andy mentioned something before about recognizing what people have to deal with. Some people have to deal with before they even come into work. So if you can understand a little bit more about what that experience is for colleagues that you're working with, and are there any equity barriers you can remove? I think asking that question, being curious about that, is something that any leader could start to look into tomorrow.
Fantastic. And Andy, same question to you.
Yeah, probably two things, if I'm allowed that. Firstly is around getting to know the staff networks within your organisation. And if there isn't any staff networks, well, then this is an opportunity to say, wouldn't it be good if we had some? And then the second thing is around the data, and particularly if we're talking about the NHS, is people understanding the WRES and WDES metrics within their organisation, which will give you a really good indication of how disabled and colleagues from the global majority feel that they're being treated by the organisation, and that gives you a great platform to do something about it.
That's some really excellent top tips from both of you. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you both for your time and joining us today. So thank you, Monique. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Equity Charter podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the series. And if you'd like to know more, go to our website at www.equitycharter.digital. You can follow our page on LinkedIn, join our community of practice, and you can also contact us at hello@equitycharter.digital.